Hello and welcome to the Edge of the Apiary. This is Jake Beeman with Golden Fox Farms. It is an important time on the beekeeper calendar. It is mid-August, and this is our last opportunity to get mites under control before we enter the winter cycle. That'll be the focus on the video today, a brief overview of mite control and the products that I use. There are certainly more thorough exposés on mite control that are out there. I'll include some links to other videos and resources below. And that includes stuff like the Honeybee Health Coalition, which has an excellent suite of tools and information for you to use to pick which control methods work best for the colonies you have. Now, what is a mite? The Varroa mite, Varroa destructor, is a pest originating out of Asia. It initially lived on Apis cerana, the Asian honeybee. It made this transition to Apis mellifera about 60 or 70 years ago in China or Korea, depending who you ask. Over time, that pest made its way here and evolved to become a specialist pest of just Apis mellifera, the European honeybee. This thing reproduces under the cap of the pupae in the beehive. It actually eats on the developing bee and lays its eggs and hatches its brood, and they too feed on the developing bee, consuming not only hemolymph, bee blood, but also vitellogenin, the bee's liver. The other aspect, the other problem with this pest is it's a huge vector for disease. As one might expect, it's effectively a hypodermic needle punching all these bee skins. There's over 80 known bee diseases, of which over 50 have been named and categorized. The Varroa mite spreads a good number of them. And the bigger part of Varroa control for us today is actually reducing the amount of disease that's allowed to run around in the hive. It's actually this disease, or these diseases, combined with the impacts of the feeding itself, that causes such extreme mortality with Varroa mites. Now, there's a seasonality to all of this. Mite populations coming out of winter are at their smallest, but as brood rearing in the bee colony commences, mite rearing commences because they're rearing their brood on our bee brood. Those numbers move in parallel, increasing until about July. In July, we reach peak bee colony population. The issue is the mite population keeps growing for another month afterwards into August. That's why this time of year we can get sudden spikes in the relative mite populations in the hive as bee populations go down and mite populations continue to go up. Historically, treatment was done once a year in August. However, as the diseases vectored by the mites became more virulent, we had to keep the mite numbers lower than they would be otherwise. This meant more treatments and more controls through the year. When I started, mite thresholds were acceptable at 10 or even 12%. Today, it's 2%, the highest I've seen. A lot of people use 1% as a control threshold, giving you an idea how much more significant the diseases are. A lot of commercial operations are forced to treat 4 times a year because of this, having to keep those numbers consistently low. Now, to help control mite populations before we get to August, there's a couple of things we can do. 2 things in particular. One is oxalic application over winter. It is really effective. I use it on all of my colonies to get you as close to 0 as you can coming out of winter with minimal negative impacts to the bees themselves. Oxalic is one of the safer products we can use. However, its efficacy is really limited to the wintertime when there's no brood. So it works very well in the wintertime, but not very well other times of the year. But again, using it in winter gets you pretty close to a 0. The other common method is treating in springtime, using something like Formic Pro or Mite Quick Strips. I myself use a lot of Formic Pro. I find it more user-friendly than the Mite Quick Strips. They're both made by NOD. It just has a longer shelf life and a slightly reduced off-gassing rate. So it's I think it works better for my applications. I don't apply them to all my colonies in the spring, but I have several very smart beekeepers that I work with that do. And again, it knocks those mite numbers down. So when you get to this critical time in August, they're not as significant, and it's easier to keep things under control. One friend of mine uses a 1% threshold for treatments. She hit them all with oxalic not oxalic. Well, she did use oxalic on all of them and formic. And she's only having to treat about 40% of the colonies this time of year using Apiguard or Apivar. Now, I'm a big adherent of test and treat. Test and treat means confirming mite populations before using an acaricide to control the mite populations. The reason why you would want to do that is there isn't a mite treatment that doesn't negatively impact the hive. Like I said, oxalics isn't that negative of impact, but it's also not very effective this time of year. It's very effective in wintertime, but this time of year not very effective at all. All the other ones have very significant impacts on the colony when used. So we only want to use treatments if we have to. Another aspect of using mite washes is it also lets you identify your low mite production colonies. This is highly important if you want to select for mite resistance in your operation. I use the alcohol wash method. And the reason why I use the alcohol wash method is one, it's what I really started with and learned to use. And two, it's kind of the standard bearer. It's very effective. You're going to get a very reliable number using the alcohol wash. There are other methods that don't involve killing the bees to get a mite number. They are the sugar shake. There is a CO2 method that's available. We used to say the sugar shake was not as reliable, and it's not, but it's reliable enough it's going to tell you if you have a problem or not correctly 95% of the time. That's still pretty dang good. So if you're against using the alcohol wash, use the sugar shake and get yourself a number so you know when you need to treat. We will show a alcohol wash here shortly. Let's do a mite wash on this colony. I've been in this colony since 7/9, about a month ago, when I noticed it was queen right and had a good brood pattern. Now, my concerns are there's a lot of dead bees in front of this hive, so it might have a disease issue in there. And one of the things we can do while in there is a mite wash just to see if the disease might be mite-induced and in turn controllable by just treating the mite population. Got my smoker, it's still running, thank goodness. Pop the front door, and then I'll get into this thing. What I'm looking for a mite wash is a frame with open brood on it, because that's where your young nurse bees are. And when I find that, you'll see the rest of the steps afterwards. They seem pretty docile. I'm wearing my jacket just because this yard has a few colonies that are just mean enough. But these girls seem pretty friendly, so I'm going to go gloveless and see what happens. With luck I don't embarrass myself. Okay, I'm going to go straight for this middle, because that is the most likely spot to find brood, and possibly a queen. Now it is dirty. They might be broodless. They might have brood problems. That has actually got a bunch of honey on it. I'm going to avoid that frame. Of course, the next one's not much better in that regards. Good news is they have food. They have a spotty brood pattern, which is always alarming. That could be food caused. It could be mite and hygiene caused. It could be disease caused. That's just a little spottier than I like to see. I see 0 open brood on my side. 0 open brood. No queen on it though. And the pattern isn't that terrible for this time of year. However, I'm seeing some truncated bees. This girl here has a really short abdomen. And that is a sign of deformed wing virus B, which is one of the diseases spread by Varroa destructor. So we'll definitely do a wash on this colony. I'll take a look at 2 or 3 more frames to see if I can find a better frame, but barring that, I'll use this one. You don't want the perfect to become the enemy of the good. Oh, they're getting a little bumpy. No larva. You also want to keep an eye out for the queen when you're doing a wash, because the last thing we want to do is send the queen for a drink. I'm going to look at one last frame here. I'm going to go in the other direction, see if I get lucky, find some larvae. And again, if you don't find larvae, just use a frame that's as close to where larvae should have been. The reason why we're doing that is we're ultimately looking for nurse bees for this method. Nurse bees are going to have your highest loading of mites on them because they are proximal to the mite food, the brood. Okay, this frame has a minority of open brood on it. That's more than any other frame we've seen. This is going to be our wash frame. Unfortunately, the queen's on it, so I need to get the queen off of here. I'll just pick her up and place her into the hive, like so she can dash on in. And we'll do a wash. Here's how I do the wash. I have my tub, I have my half-cup measure, I have my wash vessel. The wash vessel is already 3/4 filled with alcohol. This does kill the bees, but the bees will gladly sacrifice their lives to help you keep the hive healthy. So what I'll do is I'll take this tub and I'm going to shake the bees into it. Now I need a half cup of bees. That's probably going to be light in terms of being a half cup. So I'll give them a little bonus shake from one of the less ideal frames. I'll take the tub, shake the bees into a corner, do my half cup scoop, put them in the wash, cap it. I have 300 bees in that wash, roughly speaking, 300 bees to a half cup. Those bees are already dead. The alcohol kills them very rapidly. This is going to be 70% isopropanol. And we'll shake this for a minute. Now, a couple of notes before we open this thing up. I have the alcohol up this high because the original instructions for this would say have the alcohol here and then you shake it to kill all the bees, but then you open it back up to add enough alcohol to flush the mites off. A lot of people didn't read the instructions that far, and they'll keep the alcohol way down here and do a wash and get no count because all the mites are still up here. The alcohol needs to be up here to flush the mites off those dead bees. After we do our shake for a minute, you can then look at the bottom to do the actual mite count. And I can tell you, before I started, there were 2 mites in here. 3, there's a third now. Before I started, the alcohol had 2 mites in it. I now see 1, 2, 3, 4 mites in this vessel. So this hive only has 2 mites per 300 bees, so less than 1%. And I have not treated these girls, at least this year. I don't know what their provenance is. Let's see if I can remember. I wintered them, but couldn't tell you much more than that. These are some Bigfoots, if I had to guess, just from the temperature and coloration. But they don't need any mite control, which is fantastic. I can tell you the dead out front look like normal dead bees coming out of a hive. There are no signs of paralysis or anything else in there. I just saw the one bee with a stubby butt, which made me wonder if I had a mite issue, which I don't. Now, when you're done with the wash, you can take this vessel apart, drain your dead bee pile, chuck your dead bees into the distance, and now you have this alcohol. You can actually just reuse this and just subtract the number of mites you already have in it until you really have too many mites to do that. After that, you can actually decant this and pretty much use the alcohol indefinitely because all the junk will settle to the bottom. Now back to treating. This time of year, there's basically 3 products you can pick from: Formic, Apiguard, and Amitraz. With Formic, the big thing is temperatures. If you have the full-size box with all the instructions on it, it has very specific temperature limits. If I recall correctly, temperature needs to stay below 85 degrees on the day of application and below 93 degrees for the next 3 days. Formic Pro and Mite Quick Strips are both formic acid fumigants. As temperature goes up, the amount of vapor produced goes up. So if it gets too hot, they belch out the acid too fast, it can cause the colony to blow out or pretty much they abscond, kill the queen, kill all the brood. All sorts of bad stuff happens when it goes over temperature. So that's one to really watch. It also has a short shelf life. Mite Quick Strips is 1 year from manufacture, so half the time you buy it's already halfway through its shelf life. Formic Pro has a 2-year shelf life. It's a lot easier to manage that and keep that in your stores and not have it all go bad on you. Downsides with Formic, again, it can kill bees, it can kill queens, especially if used outside of those temperature ranges. It has erratic efficacy. It can be anywhere from 50% effective to 75 to 80% effective, and more than any of the other ones, really requires you doing a wash afterwards to ensure it actually worked. There's also specifics to how the hive is ventilated with Formic. The instructions from the manufacturer, if I recall correctly, involve having a wide open entrance and the IPM board in. I don't like having wide open entrances. You can always screen that thing partway off and still have airflow, but just realize there's a lot of air control you have to do using Formic and the other fumigants. Pros of Formic Pro and Mite Quick Strips, it kills mites under the brood cap. That's unique to the Formic products, which is why it's also such a great thing to use in the springtime where so much of the population is under the caps. And something to keep in mind with all of this, most of the mites in the hive are under the caps. They don't show up in the wash, which is why some of the other methods don't work so well. Another big one, and one I use not as much as I used to, but I'll still rely on it when I have to, is Amitraz. The most common format you'll find Amitraz in the legal apiary is Apivar strips. These are a plastic strip that's impregnated with the Amitraz. And you can see it's vacuum sealed in this foil pouch thing. There's little pinholes in these. You can use a nail to hang these in the hive between the brood frames, 2 in each 10-frame box, or 1 for every 5 frames of bees, with a max of 4 strips per hive. I should note this strip package is foil for a reason. The product in here is activated on exposure to moisture, including atmospheric moisture. So once this package is opened, these strips begin discharging, which means if you open this package and you don't use all the strips in 2 weeks, well, it's garbage. You got to chuck it out. It's no longer viable. You can't save half of it for next year. It's a one-shot deal. Perks of the Apivar, no upper temperature limit. And in the summertime here, it can get pretty dang hot, so it's nice to have that independence, if you will. Other perk with Apivar, it doesn't seem to negatively impact queen brood rearing. She'll keep laying with Apivar on the hive, and that's a real handy thing if you need to control mites while requeening a colony, which we occasionally encounter. I primarily use Apivar today for those colonies where I have a special queen that I want to make sure I'm not going to do anything that'll risk her, so I'll reserve Apivar for those colonies. Now, there's a lot of problems with Apivar as well. One is cost. You're looking at $20 for a 4-pack, which is one hive. It's far and away the most expensive one out there. And there's concerns about efficacy. We've been hearing increasing rumblings of failed treatments with Amitraz. And one day we're going to wake up and Amitraz isn't going to work anymore the same way Apistan stopped working. And that day is increasingly approaching. It's getting ever closer to being reality. So it's one of those things you're going to have to watch for. One day the product's not going to work at all. Other issues with Amitraz is comb contamination. While they will proudly exclaim Amitraz doesn't get absorbed by wax or stick around the hive very long, its byproducts are. So that's why we can't use it with supers on the hive, which is a big drawback. You can use Formic with supers on the colony, which is also important in the springtime. In the fall, not so much a concern. I've taken all the supers off because we rarely get a fall flow worth extracting. So I can use Apivar on these hives and not worry about contaminating supers. However, in commercial colonies, the amount of Amitraz that's been absorbed by the comb or Amitraz byproducts is actually significant enough to cause sterility in drones. About 20% of the sperm in the drone is killed by the background levels of Amitraz in these colonies, or Amitraz byproducts in these colonies. The last one I use with any regularity is Apiguard, and Apiguard is available in 2 different versions in the United States. One is this handy dandy single dose tin, and the other is the bulk tub that you dose out using a large needle, or a large syringe rather. Far cheaper using the bulk tub as a treatment method than all the other stuff we've talked about. But it is also a fumigant. It has upper temperature limits. This is a single dose. You would apply this to a hive and come back 2 weeks later and put a second one on. Now, that said, the label that comes with your bulk tub and with these little tins will also mention a second method. Now, they have instructions for temperatures above 77 degrees where you use a lower dose weekly, 2, 3, 4 times to control the mite population. With both of those, the hive is relatively buttoned up during application to keep the fumes inside. Now, this lands us on an important conversation. Something you'll often hear is the label is law. And what that means is to use this product legally, you got to use the instructions the manufacturer gives you. What they don't tell you is that doesn't mean just this, but any instructions the manufacturer publishes. And this is an important talking point. On Apiguard's website, they note a very high temperature application method. They don't list the temperature. I would estimate to be 90 to 93 degrees, which is a common occurrence in this region and many areas south of us. With the very high temperature method, you use increased ventilation to keep the hive from being blown out or absconding. So quite literally, for a number of us, we need to consult the label that's not the label that came with the product. I'll have a link for that in the comments. Now, the downside of these tins, they're super convenient for doing a full dose. For a half dose, they say, oh, just cut it in half. That's not really the most convenient thing in the world. That's where these tubs really shine. These tubs are expensive, but they come with a big old syringe. They can dose out whatever specific amount you want to put on that colony. Now, I noted Amitraz products can contaminate the comb and honey. The same is true for Apiguard. The thymol is readily absorbed into the wax and is often the biggest amount of contamination found in wax comb, though we can't really assign any negative impacts to that thymol being there. This is as opposed to formic acid, which just discharges the atmosphere and doesn't build up within the comb. It's one of the other perks of using formic acid instead. One more note about the fumigants. Apiguard and Formics both cause a retraction in brood rearing. I've been in colonies with Apiguard applications that look outright queenless because you can't find any young eggs or anything in there. So just be aware if you're using one of these fumigant products, you're going to stall out brood rearing, and that can be a problem depending on the colony's strength. If you use the wrong dose of Apiguard too much or not enough ventilation, you'll induce an abscon. The bees will leave. I know a guy that lost half his colony to that last year, which lands us on 2 points of common sense. If the bees are telling you they hate something, you need to take a step back and reevaluate what you're doing. Mite control is ineffective if it causes the bees to abscon, because the goal is to keep the bees alive, not to lose them. And also, use your common sense. Use products with known efficacy. We see new goofball methods for oxalic acid during brood time coming up every year, and they reliably fail to actually knock down mite numbers in my region. They may maintain mite numbers, they may keep the numbers from going up, but if you're needing to knock the mite numbers down, they are not effective for that. And I don't know how many hours and piles of cash have been dumped on these goofball oxalic methods for them to continue not to work. We have methods that do work here. Use them. You're not going to save any money if you kill your colonies because you're using some off-the-wall method you cooked up on your toilet seat. Lastly, at the end of the treatment cycle, make sure it worked. Formic acid can have some pretty erratic results due to ventilation things, and they all can have accidents on the way that reduce efficacy. So do a mite wash on your treated colonies afterwards to make sure your treatment actually worked. You don't want to let your guard down as you cross the finish line. That's a miserable thing. There are such things as mite bombs and drift. They are real. I've seen them, and the only way you can spot those is catching them with a late watch. A late wash is the only way. With that, we've covered the mite control methods I use in my apiary and how I address mites this time of year. I hope this prepares you for a successful fall and winter. And with that, I'll say good luck and happy beaking.